Hello, wonderful U.S. history fans. This is Mr. Kanondike, aka Teacher Man 5000, aka K-Man, aka Mr. K. Here to talk about the outbreak of the Civil War. And basically, what I want to talk about is the 70 years or so, the 50 years between 1800 and the outbreak of the Civil War. So you're looking at around 7 years ago. Our fathers brought forth a new nation. Remember that from the Gettysburg Address? That's about the amount of time, and I'll let you all look that up. But 7 years ago was amount of time from our fathers, our founding fathers, created the country. So that tells you where Lincoln was going with that. But number one, first thing, I'm going to try not to take more than 5-10 minutes on this. So, number one, very first thing, the Missouri Compromise. So, the idea that slavery was an issue was 100% from the time this country started. With Washington and Jefferson, slavery arguably, but was the number one issue dividing the country. And you can even see here in geography that it did divide the country at one point. So this is the Missouri Compromise line of 1820, and it basically said the House and the Senate and the presidency and all our three branches totally got on board with the idea that this line would not be crossed. So new states coming into the Union, everything below that red line you see here, green line I guess, is slave, and everything above it was supposed to come into the country with either the idea, well, first, just that they would all be free states, but then eventually it evolves even further, and we'll talk about that in a second, to popular sovereignty. And we'll talk about the other compromise that happens only 30 years later in just a few minutes. So there's number one. That's the first reason that this was not going away. This was a dividing line pretty much down the middle of outside of Virginia that was going to divide this country and cause a huge tussle. So, number two. Economics. Two big, complicated economic factors. First being technological advancement. Technological advancement? What do you mean? They're slaves. No, actually, technological advancement led to what would be counter to what you would think. It led to more slavery, which is a horrible illustration in economics. There's a reason they call it the dismal science. It's a horrible instance where economic and technological advancement caused more people to become enslaved, and this was not Eli Whitney's even intention with the cotton gin, but instead it freed up more slaves to pick the cotton and less to pick the seeds from the cotton. So it's kind of complicated, but it led to an increase, really, in slavery and the price of slaves and the entire horrible institution. Number two, economic aspect, is that these were the wealthiest people pretty much on the planet. So a small group of people got very, very wealthy on the slave trade in the South, and with lots of money comes lots of entrenched power. So you had some very, very powerful men that did not want to give up that power. So, and I mean, it made up a vast majority of the wealth in the southern United States, especially. In some of the states, in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama area, some of those states were 75% plus slave population. So if that gives you a little insight into the amount of concentrated power. All right, so fast forward, we're working in through the 1800s, 1820 Missouri Compromise. Two, we have this economic innovation and entrenched power that continues to develop 1800s all the way through till the Civil War. Three, fugitive slave law. Pretty much a slap in the face for abolitionists, everybody, and it really, really made the North mad, because by 1850 you had a huge population advantage in the North, but you still had this vast amount of power in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, in the federal government. There was real belief and real force behind the idea of this being another example of slave power, and it was totally evident that the entrenched power of the South was spread throughout the federal government. So you had this like entrenched power that comes along. Oh, well, here's a great idea. Here's a new idea. We're gonna actually let anybody basically accuse any. You better have either some kind of person to vouch for you, or any white man could accuse a slave of being their property. And if they did it in front of a judge, guess what? You were brought in as a fugitive slave. Well, people took horrid advantage of this, and if you see the movie 12 Years a Slave, this is how he becomes a slave. But they took horrid advantage of this and actually started kidnapping people throughout the North. Not a joke, really happened. Actual documentation of that, and if nothing else, it made Northern citizens feel like they would never escape the idea that they were going to be property, because at this time, by 1850, there were black Northern citizens, and even citizens in the North that would have been part of Canada. They had. It's so important to remember, and I think that's something that people lose with the Civil War, is that they had already established themselves. African Americans had already established themselves as receiving justice and being equal under the law in certain places. So how can you have this? It was terrible. Well, that leads to the ultimate slap in the face in the courts of our great land, and a guy named Roger B. Taney. Number 5, the Dred Scott case, where a African American slave actually sued for his freedom and I'll give you just a second of backstory. In Illinois, where he was housed with his quote-unquote master. I hate even using these words. It's so despicable. But he basically sues for his freedom, finally gets to the Supreme Court 10 years later. This really sweet guy, Roger B. Taney, and I'm glad that more people remember Taney than, or remember Dred Scott than Taney, because that guy's a super not cool, but no rights. Let me read what the esteemed judge of the Supreme Court wrote. Being of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. That's your illustrious Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, number 5, in the 5-round table, in under 10 minutes, of how the Civil War started. Dun dun dun! The election of 1860. And what you wouldn't really consider to be exciting buildup was really the culmination of all these things. And finally, you have this split election that basically cut the country in half. So, as you can see, Lincoln gets all of the red northern states. Then the Democrats split the rest of their vote. So the Republican Party won all these red states in the north. The Democrats split. Lincoln barely gets 40% or so of the popular vote, and in the original 13 states finally control fewer than 50% of the total electoral vote. So you see how fast the country is expanding. And that's it. As soon as Lincoln's elected, all of these states below in blue here leave the Union. And that leads to outbreak of the Civil War, when the South attacks Harper's Ferry Arms Depot, and local militias start forming, and then by 1862, you're into the battles of Bull Run and wholesale slaughter. 600,000 men killed in the most bloody, costly war in the country's history. But we'll get to more of that later. Hope you enjoyed this. I'll show you a couple to illustrate the immense wealth of the few people in the South, And you can read the quote here. The plantation where I live contains 1,000 acres, at least 700 acres of it rich thicket, the remainder good hardy plantable land. Together with a choice crew of Negroes, 29 in all, with stocks of cattle and hogs at each quarter, upon the same land is my dwelling house, furnished with all accommodations for a comfortable and genteel life, living, with 13 rooms in all, 9 of them plentifully furnished with all things necessary and convenient, and all houses of use, well furnished with brick chimney, 4 good cellars, a dairy, dovecote, stable, bar, henhouse, kitchen, and all conveniences, a garden 100 foot square, together with a good stock of cattle, hogs, mares, sheep, and etc. Sound like a pretty darn nice life? Yeah, I think so.